Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome back for another card video. Today's card uses the set by Lawn Fawn called Love You S'more. It's got a lot of cute stamps in it. I'm also using the Little Bee heart dies. There are 11 dies in this set. There are just plain hearts, and then in a separate die there's the cross stitching, so you can do them outside or inside the solid hearts. The first thing I'm going to do is take a piece of Neenah Solar White cardstock and I'm going to mark the middle of it. This is 5.5 by 4 1/4, and then I can use my T-square to draw a line down the center. If you don't have a T-square, I highly recommend it. I use mine all the time, and this will allow me to line up the top and the bottom of the heart and get it centered in the middle of this cardstock. And then all I have to do is erase my pencil lines. I'm going to take the center part of what I just cut out and I'm going to ink it up with some chipped sapphire first. I forgot to prime my applicator, and you can see what happens when you don't prime it. You can see I'm getting already some of those swatches. Priming it just involves taking it to a piece of scratch cardstock and just kind of going back and forth with your ink pad as if you're using the real cardstock, but you're just kind of getting it ready for the real cardstock. Anyway, so I darkened it up a little bit so that you really couldn't see it. Then I moved on to some tumbled glass, and I just wanted a way to kind of fade that into the white, and I thought the tumbled glass would be a good color to do that with. So I'm just doing the upper right corner, and so it's going to fade to white to the lower left hand corner. I decided to add some water splatters, so I'm just going to tap some water on there, and when you do this with Distress ink, it will remove the color, so I'll get some pretty water spots. You can use a tissue to wipe up the water, but I find that it doesn't really make the splatters that much brighter. It just sort of wipes up some of the water. So I did this a couple of times, and I wiped the excess water off my brush so I wouldn't get those big globs that fall down. Next, I'm going to do all my stamping. So I have a few items that need to be stamped with brown ink, so I'm using Memento Rich Cocoa. I also did the s'more in the Rich Cocoa, but decided that I'd rather have it in black, so I also stamped it in black later. For my flames, I wanted a dark red outline, so I'm using Cherry Cobbler by Stampin' Up, and I'm going to do 2 of the big ones and 3 of the small ones. And then finally I have some stamping in black Memento. I'm doing both of my sentiments in the black Memento, and then I also went back and did the s'more in the black Memento. Now I'm going to start my coloring. You can see that I already colored the marshmallow and didn't like it, so I restamped it. If you look at the one I just colored, I don't like it because there's no white in the middle, and I should have left some white in the middle. I colored the whole center with the E40, which is my light color. So now I'm starting with the E43, and I'm just doing the very, very edge. And now I'm doing the E40, and I'm just making sure that I flick upward, but I don't go all the way across the marshmallow, so I do leave some white in the middle, and this will make it look a lot more dimensional. I'm going to do the marshmallow and the s'more the same exact way. You can see that I sort of have a minimum amount of coloring I need to do when I'm flicking. So because I only want to color on the marshmallow for a little bit, I'm starting much further outside the image so that when I flick upward, I'm only getting the color where I want it. And here I am going with the E40 and just leaving the center white. For the graham cracker, I'm using E34 first. I'm just doing the back of the cookie and then the sides. And then I went in there with an E31 and did an all over color to blend that out. And then for the chocolate, I decided to just go simple with one color, E59, and I just colored that all the way across. My flames are going to be yellow at the bottom and red at the top. So I'm going to flip this over so that I can flick my pen upward. And I'm going to use the R08, which is the red, and I'm going to color the tips. So because I'm cutting all of these out, I'm not worried about going outside the lines. When I move to my orange, the YR04, I'm going to go over a little bit of the red, but not too much because then it'll kind of get rid of the red, and I don't want that. So I'm just going to flick upward, starting about the middle of the red, and then go up. And then the yellow, I'm kind of going in the opposite direction, but really I'm just filling in whatever's left with the white. The bottom of these aren't going to show, so it's really not that big of a deal. But it's okay to have streaks, like lines of color, because you kind of see that in a flame. So here again, I'm going to show you one more. I'm going to do the tips red, and then I come down with the orange a little bit more, and then the yellow I'm working kind of from the bottom up to fill in the gaps. Now with this one, I decided I covered too much of the orange with the yellow, so I went back in and added a little bit more. Now that I have everything colored, I'm going to cut all these pieces out with a scissor. Now you see that this stick is rather thin, and the Memento that I just got, the Rich Cocoa, it's brand new and it's really, really light, much lighter than the other one I had. So I just took that same marker I used for the chocolate, the E59, and I just colored the whole thing. And I did cut this a little thicker because it's so thin, and so that way I had the whole thing solid E59. And I also didn't like how light the outline was for my marshmallow when I stamped it in the Memento Rich Cocoa. So I did the same thing here. I just outlined it a little bit more with my E59, and it really made a difference because this is going to be sitting on some white cardstock, and it really pops if you have a nice dark outline. Now I'm going to start putting the pieces together. The first thing I'm going to do is arrange my flames. So I'm just going to sort of eyeball how I want them to be laid out at the bottom of my heart, and then I just kind of figure out if I did it right. I move them around. I went back and forth a few times until I got it the way I liked it, and then I just marked it with a pencil, and then I realized that I needed to mark the other side with a pencil, so I'm doing that here. And that's just to mark where the glue needs to go. So I'm just going to draw a thin line of the Tombow Mono Multi-Glue, and that's just to get the flames off my craft mat and onto this piece of cardstock. So I'll position it using my pencil lines that I just drew and just press it down into place. And this glue is really sticky, so I'm going to easily be able to flip this over, and now my flames are all where they need to be. I'm going to go ahead and add my Scotch foam tape now to make sure that these flames don't move, and then I'll finish it off on the rest of the card later. I'm going to put this panel into the MISTI so that I can line up the sentiment in the lower right hand corner. I just put my s'more there so I can make sure that I had enough space to put it in later. And now I'm going to add my sentiments. So I decided it'd be interesting to cut a slant on one and a slant on the other so they kind of look continuous. So I'm going to cut each of these. I'm just going to do it manually with a scissor. And I'm going to place them where I want them. And once I get them positioned correctly, I'm just going to mark it with a pencil. I'm going to do the same thing on the s'more, mark it with a pencil. And that way I know where the glue needs to be, because this is going to be glued to the back of that heart panel. So I put a little bit of glue on there, and then I'm going to position it underneath. And I realized I had my grid sheet right there on my craft table, so I went ahead and grabbed it and used it to help line up these sentiments, make sure they were straight. And then I did the same thing with the s'more. I am still working through my two-way glue pen withdrawal. I keep forgetting to buy a new glue pen. I'm going to try the Zig. I ordered something from Stampin' Up! As well, but I have a fine tip applicator that I put on my multi-medium mat, and I'm going to adhere this to the top of my heart panel. And now I'll flip this over and finish off putting on all of my Scotch foam tape. And then I'm going to take off the release tape, and I'm going to put this on top of the blue heart that I colored earlier. This was a little tricky to line up. If you wanted to avoid this step, you could just color the card base with the sapphire and the tumbled glass, and then that way you just have to put this heart on the card base. Next, I'll flip this over and put some ATG tape runner on the back of the heart. And then I have whatever's left over of my Scotch foam that hasn't been adhered yet. And then I'll use the left lower corner of my MISTI to line this up on a piece of Neenah Solar white cardstock folded 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And then I'm going to add my marshmallow with some Scotch foam tape. And then I'm going to take my s'more cookie that I already colored, and I'm going to adhere that with some Scotch foam tape. Finally, I'm going to add some grounding to my cookie so it's sitting on it something. And I grabbed my W3. I'm not sure why, but normally I would use a W1 for this, and I realized it's a little bit too dark. So I grabbed my W1, and I thought I'd kind of blend this out a little bit, but then it got to be too wide. And so then I grabbed my 0 colorless blender thinking I'll just sort of erase it. So I really went and blended some of it in, try to kind of push the color back over. And then I was like, you know what, I think this is just a little too much. So I just left it as is and decided it was just fine. So anyway, that is the card for today. Really cute and pretty simple. A lot of different pieces, but nothing that's too hard to do. I hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.